The blast hit with a deafening crack, shaking the ground beneath my feet. By the time I threw the truck into park and ran up the hill, my great-grandfather's century-old irrigation system lay in ruins, stone and dust scattered in every direction. And there stood Lily Hawthorne, HOA president, and self-proclaimed neighborhood savior, grinning smugly, snapping selfies like she'd just won a prize. "Free demolition," she said, brushing off her pristine polo shirt. "Your swamp's been dragging down property values." What she didn't realize, what she couldn't possibly have known, was that this swamp had kept the valley safe for 100 years, protecting the land from flooding. And now, with spring snowmelt right around the corner, I knew exactly what was coming, and it wasn't going to stop at her luxury homes. I looked at her, my jaw clenched. "Hope you've got flood insurance," I said, watching her face shift from smug to something else. What she didn't realize, what I was about to make her realize, was that she had just turned her biggest asset into the community's biggest liability, and it was going to cost her everything. Lily Hawthorne arrived like she always did, head held high, a smile plastered across her face, her BMW X7 gleaming in the morning sun. She stepped out of the car with her clipboard in hand, looking like she'd just won a victory, though she hadn't even begun. A small crew of workers stood behind her, ready to make her dreams a reality, no matter who or what got in the way. "We're here to renovate," she said, her words dripping with false sincerity as she glanced over the lush land surrounding us. "The HOA is pushing for upgrades to the neighborhood, and it all starts with you." I stood there, arms crossed, trying to keep my temper in check. Lily's grand plans for Millbrook Estates had been clear from the beginning. She wanted to transform the quiet historical community into another cookie-cutter resort development, sprawling mansions, golf courses, spas, what she called modern luxury. It all sounded good on paper, except for one problem: my land. The irrigation system, a 100-year-old network of stone channels that my great-grandfather had designed, stood in her way. She glanced at it with barely concealed distaste, dismissing it as a swamp. "Your little irrigation system," she said casually, "is nothing but an outdated eyesore. It's lowering property values." What Lily didn't understand was that this eyesore had kept the entire valley safe for decades, holding back the floodwaters that could easily destroy her new developments. But to her, it was just another obstacle in the way of her vision for the perfect, pristine community. And that's when I knew she wasn't just a power-hungry HOA president. She was a developer with a plan to take everything I held dear, and she was going to use whatever means necessary to get it. The first letter arrived on a Thursday. It was thick, too thick, and when I tore open the envelope, the words seemed to blur together. "Notice of unpaid assessments," it said in big, bold letters at the top, accompanied by a list of supposed charges I had no memory of agreeing to. I stared at the document, my grip tightening on the paper as I skimmed the list. $12, 0 inches back. Fees for community water management services I had never requested, received, or even knew existed. The nerve of it all. By the time I had finished reading, my blood was boiling. It wasn't just the absurdity of the fees. It was the sheer audacity of the HOA, led by Lily Hawthorne, to assume they could simply demand money for non-existent services. I hadn't signed up for any HOA, not when I moved back to the land my grandfather had passed down to me. No, Lily had nothing on me. Still, the power of the HOA was undeniable, and that's what made their threats so dangerous. I picked up the phone and dialed Lily's number. It rang twice before she picked up. "Ezra, darling. So nice to hear from you." Lily's voice was sweet, but there was something about it that rubbed me the wrong way. "Nice to hear from you too, Lily." I bit back the sharpness in my tone. "What is this nonsense about unpaid fees? I don't recall agreeing to any of this." She let out a soft laugh, as if the whole thing was some kind of joke. "Oh, Ezra," she said, dragging out my name in that condescending tone of hers. "You've been living on this land for how long now? Don't you think it's time you start contributing to the community? The HOA manages resources, water rights, and land maintenance. It's for the good of everyone, of course." Her words felt like a slap in the face. "I've never been part of your HOA," I shot back. "This land was here long before your fancy developments and your HOA ever existed. It's my land, my grandfather's land, and I'm not paying a dime for services I never asked for." "Oh, Ezra, sweetie, I'm afraid that's not how this works." She paused, her voice suddenly colder. "You're using community resources, whether you like it or not. The water that runs through your property, well, it flows through the neighborhood, doesn't it? You're benefiting from the HOA's infrastructure." Her words were calculated, designed to make me feel small, insignificant, but I wasn't buying it. "Lily, you've got it all wrong," I said, my frustration starting to bleed through. "I'm not paying for something I never asked for, and I'm certainly not tearing down my irrigation system. You can't just come in here and demand I pay for something that doesn't exist. I'll be speaking to my lawyer." There was a long pause on the other end of the line as though she was weighing her next words. "You're making a mistake, Ezra," she finally said, her voice sweet but edged with threat. "The HOA has full authority to enforce these rules. If you don't comply, I'm afraid we'll have to take more serious action." The line went dead before I could respond. I sat there for a long moment staring at the phone. I wasn't sure if it was the anger or the sense of helplessness creeping in, but I knew this was just the beginning. The HOA wasn't going to back down, and neither would I. But I had to be careful. They had resources, connections, and the kind of power I couldn't easily fight. I walked outside, looking at the land my grandfather had worked so hard to preserve. The irrigation system, built by his hands, had provided water to the valley for decades, keeping it green and fertile. Now Lily and the HOA wanted to tear that all down, all because it didn't fit their picture-perfect image of luxury homes. What was the point of fighting for something that had been in my family for generations, if it was just going to be taken away by someone like Lily, who saw everything as a commodity to be bought and sold? That was when I decided it wasn't just about water rights or old family traditions anymore. It was about something deeper, about standing up against people who thought they could bulldoze their way through everything, regardless of who they hurt in the process. I wasn't just going to fight to keep my irrigation system. I was going to fight for something much bigger. My land, my legacy, my family. And Lily Hawthorne had just made herself the enemy. A week passed, and I was already starting to feel the weight of the fight ahead. But that was nothing compared to the second letter that came from the HOA. It was even thicker than the first, and the print on the front nearly smacked me in the face with its official-looking bold font, "Notice of Violation." I tore it open my eyes, scanning the page before my blood boiled once again. They were threatening to fine me $500 a day for failure to comply with the order to remove my irrigation system. Lily's name was scrawled at the bottom, and there was no mistaking the venom in the legalese that followed. The HOA was claiming I owed an additional $12, 0 inches back community fees for water management services, an outrageous sum for something I hadn't even asked for. I shook my head in disbelief. This wasn't about maintaining any community infrastructure, it was about Lily getting her hands on my property, removing my irrigation system to make room for her high-end resort. And now she was using the full weight of the HOA to force me into submission. By the time the phone rang that afternoon, I had already begun to plan my next move. I wasn't just going to let this slide. The HOA couldn't just issue fines based on fabricated claims. This was a land grab, pure and simple, and I wasn't about to roll over for it. Ezra Lily's voice came over the line, dripping with fake sweetness. "I see you've received our letter. How about we clear this up quickly? All you have to do is pay what you owe, and we can be done with this no trouble." "Pay what I owe," I shot back. "I don't owe you anything, Lily. You're the one who's trying to steal my land, and I'm not going to pay you a single penny for something I never agreed to." She let out a sharp laugh, one that made my skin crawl. "Oh, sweetie, you really think you have a choice here? You're using our water system, and you're violating our rules. Whether you want to admit it or not, that land you've inherited isn't really yours to keep. Not with the way you've been misusing resources." She was twisting everything into a pretzel, making it sound like I was the one who had done something wrong. "I'm not selling," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've been here longer than your HOA even existed, and you're not going to intimidate me into giving up my rights." The silence that followed felt oppressive, like she was weighing her options. Finally, her voice turned cold, sharper than before. "You're mistaken if you think this is just about fees or a stupid irrigation system," Lily said. "This is about compliance. The community needs to move forward. Your little system is standing in the way of progress, Ezra, and I'm going to make sure it's taken down whether you like it or not." Her words hung in the air like a threat, and it wasn't just a threat anymore. It was an ultimatum. I hung up the phone, feeling the weight of her words settle in. I couldn't back down. This wasn't just about an irrigation system anymore. It was about power, and Lily Hawthorne was flexing it with every word she said. I wasn't just facing some petty HOA dispute. I was facing an organized effort to take everything my family had built for the last century. A few days later, I got another letter, this time from the county building inspector. His name was Rick Morrison, and he had been sent to do a safety inspection on my irrigation system. I immediately sensed something was off. The man was a stranger to me, and the timing was too perfect. I knew it wasn't some random checkup. This was part of Lily's plan to get her way. I decided to meet him face to face. Morrison showed up the following morning in a beat-up truck, clipboard in hand, looking like a man who didn't want to be there. He didn't introduce himself properly, just nodded when I greeted him, and immediately started poking around the edges of the irrigation system. "Been here long?" he asked as he scribbled something on his clipboard, barely looking at me. "Long enough," I replied. "What's this about, Morrison? I've already told the HOA I'm not taking down my system." "Oh, I know," he muttered without looking up. "Just doing my job, making sure the property is up to code." "You don't want trouble with the county, do you?" "I don't want trouble with anyone," I said. "I just want to keep my land the way it is. It's been here for almost a century, and it works." He finally looked up, a small smirk forming on his lips. "Well, according to the HOA, it's a hazard. Structural issues, foundation erosion." I froze. The words were exactly what Lily had been hinting at in the letters, exactly what I had expected. The entire inspection was a sham. Morrison had no real qualifications. He didn't measure anything, didn't take any photographs. He barely even looked at the stone foundation. His report was a slap in the face. When the inspection report arrived later that day, I nearly choked on my coffee. The dam, it claimed, was structurally unsound and needed immediate demolition. The report even suggested it could collapse at any moment, citing severe erosion, even though the dam was made of hand-cut limestone built to last. I had been expecting this. The inspector had never even gotten close to the foundation, but there it was on paper, a fabricated report designed to back Lily's claim. I wasn't about to let this go. It was time to fight back. I immediately called in an independent engineer, a friend from my days working in hydraulic systems, to assess the structure. His report was clear: the dam exceeded current safety standards by over 200%. The erosion Morrison had claimed didn't even exist. It was all lies. Armed with that report, I was ready to take this battle to the next level. The days that followed were filled with frustration as Lily's manipulation of the HOA escalated. Every letter from her office felt like a punch to the gut. She kept pushing, and every step she took only confirmed what I already knew: this wasn't about fees or rules. It was about control. But that control came at a cost. And it wasn't just the $12 0 inches fabricated fees or the $500 a day fines for non-compliance. This was much bigger than that. It was the realization that my family's legacy was under attack, something far more valuable than any of these petty fees. The irrigation system wasn't just an old relic or a swamp, as Lily so dismissively called it. It was worth millions in ways no one could fully appreciate until it was gone. The turning point came when I was looking over my property's boundaries in preparation for the legal fight. As I pored over county records and my grandfather's notes, I stumbled upon something I had missed before: an old appraisal of the property from the 1962nd. The document listed the full value of the irrigation system as a part of the property, estimating it at $3 million. It wasn't just the cost of installation or upkeep, it was the value of flood prevention irrigation for farming, and the fact that it had been protecting this land for decades, keeping everything from crops to homes safe from the unpredictable spring runoff. I felt the weight of that number sink in. This was bigger than just me and my land. It was about the entire neighborhood. My grandfather hadn't just built a pond, he had constructed a lifeline for everyone downstream. This irrigation system had been saving Millbrook Estates from destruction for over 100 years, and Lily, with her vision of golf courses and luxury homes, was willing to tear it all down without a second thought. As I stood at the edge of the pond, looking out over the land that had been in my family for generations, I realized the full scope of what was at stake. The irrigation system wasn't just something I needed for my farm, it was a vital piece of infrastructure that affected everyone around me. Without it, the entire valley was at risk, and Lily, in her blind pursuit of development, hadn't realized that her dream of a luxury resort would turn into a nightmare for the very people she thought she was serving. I hired an expert to help me understand the full extent of the system's value. Matthews and Associates, a well-known structural firm, was called in to do an independent assessment. They sent one of their top engineers, a man who had worked on projects for the state, to evaluate the irrigation system and provide a full report. The firm's reputation was impeccable, and their findings were just as impressive. The engineer spent 6 hours at the property, crawling over the dam, measuring water flow, and testing the mortar joints between the stones. At the end of it all, his report stated that the dam exceeded current safety standards by over 200%. It was in better condition than many modern-day structures designed to last for at least another 500 years with normal maintenance. The conclusion: the irrigation system was not only functional, but it was essential. Without it, the valley would be vulnerable to floods that would devastate the homes and farms in the area. The report was a game-changer. It proved that what Lily and the HOA were doing wasn't just illegal, it was reckless. And it wasn't just me who would suffer from their actions. If they succeeded in tearing down the irrigation system, the entire neighborhood would be exposed to flooding every spring, and the agricultural land would be rendered useless. The entire community was at risk, and they hadn't even realized it yet. I knew I had to act quickly. I took the report to my lawyer, Rebecca Torres, who specialized in environmental law. She was shocked by what she read. The fact that Lily had been willing to destroy such a vital piece of infrastructure for the sake of her development was, in her words, criminally negligent. And it wasn't just the dam that was at risk. The entire watershed was part of a flood control system that protected multiple communities, including Millbrook Estates. If Lily succeeded in removing the dam, it would disrupt the natural water flow and create the kind of flooding that could cost millions in damages. The next step was clear. I had to expose this to the public before it was too late. But I also knew that I couldn't do this alone. The community needed to understand the full impact of what was happening. I started reaching out to neighbors, showing them the independent report, and explaining what Lily's plans would mean for all of us. It didn't take long for people to realize the gravity of the situation. At the next HOA meeting, I stood in front of a crowd of residents, some of whom I'd known for years, and explained what had been going on behind closed doors. I showed them the report from Matthews and Associates, highlighting the fact that the irrigation system was not only functional but essential for flood control. I explained how Lily had manipulated the HOA to push through her development plans, all while disregarding the safety of the community. The reaction was immediate and visceral. People were angry, furious, even that Lily had been so careless with their safety that she had tried to destroy something that had protected them for so long. One by one, they began to speak up, sharing their concerns and expressing their disbelief that the HOA president could have been so reckless. As the meeting went on, the mood shifted from confusion to outrage. More and more residents started to realize that Lily wasn't just harming me, she was putting everyone at risk. It wasn't just about property values or luxury homes. It was about the safety of their families, their homes, their livelihoods. By the end of the meeting, I knew I had won the support of the majority of the neighborhood. But I wasn't done yet. I still had to make sure that Lily's plans were stopped before any irreversible damage was done. I called in a few local journalists to cover the growing unrest and share the story with the wider community. The more people knew about the situation, the harder it would be for Lily to continue her campaign of destruction. The tension in Millbrook Estates was palpable. Every day I was fielding calls from neighbors, reporters, and lawyers, all eager to understand how Lily had gotten this far with her corrupt plans. It felt like the whole neighborhood was on the edge, waiting for the next move, but I knew I couldn't act hastily. The HOA was powerful, and they had every legal trick in the book to back them up. I had already exposed their lies, but now I needed to hit them where it really hurt their own system. It was just after the public meeting when the first sign of real trouble arrived. County inspectors who had been routinely checking properties in the area showed up at my door. There were two of them dressed in the typical beige uniforms, but there was no mistaking the air of authority they carried. One of them, a man named Rick Morrison, was holding a clipboard, his eyes scanning the land like he was searching for something to condemn. "Mr. Blackwood," he asked, not even offering his hand. "We're here to conduct a safety inspection on your property. Got some complaints that your irrigation system isn't up to code. We need to evaluate the structure for any potential risk of failure." I'd seen it coming. Lily's tactics were predictable, and this was just another step in her plan to put pressure on me to force my hand into tearing down the system or face a series of bureaucratic hurdles that would cost me a fortune in legal fees. But I wasn't about to let them get away with it. "Rick Wright," I said, trying to keep my tone civil but firm. "I've already had my system assessed by independent engineers. They've determined that it's in perfect condition, well above current safety standards." He didn't even acknowledge me scribbling something on his clipboard. "Just protocol, Mr. Blackwood. We'll be done soon." He barely looked at me, and certainly didn't look at the irrigation system the way an actual engineer would. He poked at the stones with a dull screwdriver, as if he were inspecting a pile of scrap metal. The sounds of the tool hitting the stone were hollow, nothing like the careful precision of an actual inspection. It was all for show. I could tell immediately that Morrison wasn't interested in finding the truth. He was interested in finding a way to help Lily's cause. After a quick walk around, he scribbled a few more notes and handed me a report. It was filled with vague language riddled with inconsistencies, and most notably, it claimed that my irrigation system was structurally unsound, citing erosion that had been unaddressed for decades. He didn't even bother to take proper measurements or record anything that would substantiate those claims. It was a sham of an inspection. "Immediate demolition is required," Morrison said, as if he had just delivered the gospel. Your dam presents a risk to the community, Mr. Blackwood. We'll be issuing an emergency order for its removal. I stood there stunned for a moment. The audacity, the sheer gall of it all. A fabricated report, an incomplete inspection, and a demolition order based on lies. Hold on, I said, stepping forward, my voice shaking with a mix of disbelief and anger. You can't just come here, make baseless claims, and issue an order like that. This land, this irrigation system, has been here for nearly a century. It's not just some dam, it's a vital part of the community. Morrison didn't even flinch. He just shrugged as though this was all part of his day job. We have our orders. You'll be hearing from the county soon. I knew that the only reason he was here was because of Lily pulling strings in the background. This wasn't about safety. It was about control. I immediately started gathering the evidence I had from Matthews and Associates, who had inspected the system thoroughly. The report they had given me proved that Morrison's claims were false. It wasn't just a question of one man's opinion, it was professional certified evidence that my system was solid. But it wasn't enough to just gather documents. I needed more than just an engineer's report. I needed to show that the county was complicit in this charade. The next day, I called up Rebecca Torres, the environmental lawyer I'd hired, and asked her to join me for a meeting with the county. We sat in the dimly lit county office, awaiting our turn to meet with the county commissioners. I had a folder full of documents including Matthews's report, the public records, and the discrepancies I had uncovered in the inspector's findings. But there was a nagging feeling in the back of my mind that we were going to face even more resistance. I needed to make sure the people who were supposed to be working for us, the county officials, knew exactly what was happening behind the scenes. When our meeting finally started, we were met with the same cold indifference I had come to expect from people who had been bought and paid for. County Commissioner Bradley Walsh sat behind his desk shuffling papers, not even looking at us. His disinterest was evident, but I could sense that something wasn't quite right. Walsh was known to have ties to Lily's development schemes, and I was beginning to understand how deep this corruption ran. Rebecca, as always, was sharp and composed. She laid out the facts for the commissioners, pointing to the legal violations, the falsified safety reports, and the clear evidence of misconduct. What we're dealing with here is more than just a rogue HOA president, she said, her voice unwavering. This is an organized effort to strip Mr. Blackwood of his property, using false claims and corruption at every level of government to achieve personal gain. It was then that Walsh, who had remained silent up until that point, finally spoke up. We understand your concerns, Miss Torres, he said, his voice smooth but defensive. But the safety of this community is our top priority. We have to act in the best interest of all residents. Rebecca didn't back down. With all due respect, Commissioner, acting in the best interest of the residents means protecting their homes, not bulldozing the infrastructure that keeps them safe. And we can prove that Lily Hawthorne's campaign to destroy this system has been based on lies. There's no danger here, and the only thing being threatened is the truth. I could feel the tension in the room shift. Walsh's poker face cracked for a split second, and I saw the faintest flicker of concern. It wasn't just the facts that had rattled him, it was the implication that people were starting to notice the corruption. I wasn't the only one paying attention anymore. We'll need time to review this, Walsh said, trying to brush us off, but Rebecca wasn't done. Time is the one thing you don't have, she replied, her voice a warning. If the dam is destroyed before this is resolved, it's not just Mr. Blackwood's property that's at risk. It's the entire community. We're talking about catastrophic flooding that would affect every home downstream. Your failure to act now could make you personally liable. The silence in the room was deafening. They knew she was right, and as we left the meeting, I could see that the commissioners were beginning to understand just how high the stakes were. But this was only the beginning. If I was going to stop Lily and her cronies from wrecking everything, I had to go further. I wasn't just fighting for my property anymore. I was fighting for everyone in Millbrook Estates. The Sunday evening meeting was electric with tension. The room was packed over 150 residents, and every seat was filled. It wasn't just anger in the air, it was fear. Fear of losing their homes, fear of what Lily was planning, and fear of what they might have unknowingly been a part of. I stood at the front holding the thick stack of documents ready to expose everything. Behind me, the projector clicked on, displaying Lily's shiny vision for Millbrook Estates, a luxury golf course, a spa, and upscale homes. But beneath it all was my land, the irrigation system that she wanted to destroy. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, my voice steady but urgent. This is what we've been fighting for. Not just my property, but yours too. I started flipping through the slides, Matthews and Associates report proving the integrity of the irrigation system, photos of the dam in perfect condition, and financial records showing how Lily had been embezzling HOA funds. Lily Hawthorne, I continued, has been using the HOA to force her development plans. What she didn't count on was the fact that this irrigation system is worth millions because it protects every one of us. The room went silent. People shifted in their seats, processing the weight of the evidence. I pointed to the financial records. $12, 0 inches fees you never asked for. Fines based on lies. A community made to pay for something it never needed. And all for what so Lily could turn your homes into a luxury resort. The murmurs grew louder, but I wasn't done yet. I've shown you the facts. And now the truth is out. Lily has used her position to profit off your backs, and she's been manipulating us all. I turned to face the board members sitting behind me, their faces flushed, avoiding eye contact with the crowd. This isn't just about me anymore. It's about you, your homes, your families, your safety. Lily has endangered all of you for her own gain, and we won't stand for it. The tension in the room was palpable. I could see people starting to question what they had once supported. There were whispers, now some angry, others uncertain. And then, as if on cue, one of the board members, Janet Morrison, stood up. I move that we remove Lily Hawthorne from all HOA positions effective immediately and freeze all accounts pending investigation into the misuse of HOA funds. The vote was quick, unanimous. Lily's face turned pale as she realized what had just happened. Her reign over the HOA had collapsed. She stood there speechless for a moment before storming out of the room defeated. But as she left, the battle wasn't over. It had just begun. This wasn't just about taking down a corrupt HOA president, it was about fighting back against an entire system that had been built on lies and power. The victory was bittersweet. Sure, Lily was out, but that didn't mean the battle was over. If anything, it felt like it had just begun. As the crowd slowly filed out of the meeting room, murmurs of disbelief and anger hung in the air. I could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on me. Lily had underestimated how far people were willing to go when their homes and their safety were at stake. But now, it was about taking the fight to the next level. And I knew I wasn't going to stop until she paid for the damage she had caused, not just to me, but to the entire community. I could see the cracks in her empire forming. Her grip on the HOA was slipping, and I wasn't going to let her get away with this. The law was on our side, and we were going to use it to the fullest. The very next morning, I called in the big guns. Rebecca Torres, the environmental lawyer who had been helping me all along, was already on her way to the office. She had the experience to handle this kind of battle, and I knew we needed her expertise more than ever. We needed to expose Lily's corruption in a way that couldn't be ignored. Rebecca arrived with her legal team, all business, ready to tear into Lily's actions. I briefed her on everything that had happened up until that point, the lies, the fake inspections, the forged reports, and I gave her the bombshell, the evidence that Lily was behind it all. I had gathered everything from county documents to financial records that showed Lily had been siphoning HOA funds into her own development projects. Time to hit them where it hurts, Rebecca said as she scanned through the evidence. If we can prove fraud, corruption, and negligence, we can go after Lily and her entire network. We're not just going after her, this is about making sure no one else in this community is ever subjected to this kind of abuse again. I nodded, feeling the weight of her words. We weren't just fighting for my property anymore. We were fighting for everyone in Millbrook Estates. The people who had trusted Lily, who had believed in her promises, and who were now waking up to the fact that they had been duped. The first step was to take the fight public. Lily had used her position to manipulate the media in the past, spinning lies about my irrigation system, claiming it was a public hazard. Now, it was time to flip the script. Rebecca and I organized a press conference with the local news outlets. I had already reached out to the reporters who had been covering the HOA scandal, and they were more than eager to dig deeper. They knew this was a story that would resonate with the community, with people who were tired of corruption and manipulation by those in power. The day of the press conference, I stood in front of a crowd of reporters, cameras flashing, microphones shoved in my face. The tension in the air was thick. This was the moment when everything could change. I started by giving them the facts, showing them the evidence of Lily's wrongdoing, how she had been using the HOA's funds to line her own pockets. I laid out the timeline connecting the dots between her lies, her manipulation of the HOA board, and the damage she had caused to the community. The reporters listened intently, scribbling notes, asking questions, and probing for more details. I knew this was my chance to let the world see what had been going on behind closed doors. I could feel the momentum building, and I knew that once the story hit the news, there was no turning back. As the conference wrapped up, I could see the media beginning to pick up steam. The story spread like wildfire across the county. Neighbors who had once been divided on the issue were starting to unite their voices, joining mine in the fight for justice. But Lily wasn't going to give up that easily. She had connections, and she had power. She still had a network of corrupt officials who were more than willing to back her up. The real test came a few days later when the city council meeting was scheduled. Lily, always one step ahead, had managed to secure an emergency vote to try and get the dam removed through eminent domain. She knew the clock was ticking, and she was desperate to get her hands on the land for her development project. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday, the last chance for her to push through her plans before the state's intervention became a real possibility. I couldn't let her win. I couldn't let her get away with destroying everything my great-grandfather had built. So I did what I had to do. I took my fight to the council. Rebecca and I gathered all our evidence, all the proof of Lily's corruption and fraud, and I presented it to the council members one by one. Lily was there, of course, with her polished smile and her stack of documents. She tried to spin her story again, telling everyone that the irrigation system was a public hazard, that it was unsafe for the community, but this time she wasn't getting away with it. As I stepped to the podium, I looked out at the council members and addressed them with everything I had. I laid out the truth. Lily Hawthorne has been lying to all of you. She's been lying to the community, and now she's trying to use her position to steal my land and destroy my property under false pretenses. I went on to explain the fraudulent inspections, the manipulated documents, and the false safety claims that Lily had been using to justify the demolition. I pointed to the reports from Matthews and Associates, from the environmental specialists, and from the engineers who had proven the irrigation system was not only safe but vital to the entire neighborhood. One of the council members, a woman named Laura Fenton, leaned forward, clearly paying attention. "What you're saying," she said slowly, "is that this system isn't just a liability. It's actually a critical piece of infrastructure." "Exactly," I replied, my voice steady but filled with urgency. "Without it, Millbrook Estates is at risk of flooding. My great-grandfather built this system to protect the valley. It's not just my land at risk, it's every home downstream." The council room fell into a heavy silence. I could feel the weight of the moment. There was no turning back now. The room began to murmur, the tension palpable. Lily's face twisted in anger, but she knew she was losing control. For the first time, the council members seemed to be considering the reality of what I was saying. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood," Laura Fenton said, cutting through the noise. "We'll take this under advisement and reconvene for a vote." I left the council meeting with a sense of cautious optimism. This was it. Lily had played her hand, and it had backfired. There was no way she could fight this with just her lies and manipulations. It was only a matter of time before the truth came crashing down. The city council meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. the following Thursday, but the anticipation had been building for days. The night before, I had spoken to my lawyer, Rebecca, and we had gone over everything one last time. This was it, the culmination of months of legal battles, community organizing, and mounting pressure on the corrupt HOA. I knew that Lily's last-ditch attempt to seize my property under eminent domain was about to go public, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. The meeting hall was packed. Residents filled every seat, many of them holding signs, their faces a mixture of anger and determination. Some were here to support Lily, but the majority had finally woken up to the reality of what had been happening behind the scenes. This wasn't just about one man's land anymore. It was about the safety of an entire community. The stakes had never been higher. Lily was already there, sitting confidently at the front, flanked by her lawyer and a handful of HOA supporters. She looked as polished as ever, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. She knew the game was changing. She knew the tide was turning, but she wasn't about to back down. She sat straight in her chair, arms folded, her usual arrogance still present as she prepared to spin her lies one last time. I walked into the meeting room with my own set of documents, my evidence stacked high. But this time, I wasn't just holding up reports and technicalities. I was holding up the truth, the real truth. And I wasn't going to let her hide behind her words anymore. The room fell silent as the council meeting started, and the chairperson, Councilman Bradley Walsh, called for order. "Let's begin," he said, his voice carrying through the room. "Mr. Blackwood, I believe you have a presentation to make. Please go ahead." I stood up and made my way to the podium, feeling the eyes of the entire room on me. My heart pounded, but I forced myself to stay calm. I knew what was at stake. This was my moment, the one I had fought for. "Thank you, Councilman," I began, my voice steady. "Ladies and gentlemen of the council, I'm here today to present the truth. This is not just about my irrigation system. It's about the safety of every home in Millbrook Estates. For too long, Lily Hawthorne and the HOA have manipulated this community for their own gain. And I am here to show you just how deep that corruption runs. I clicked to the first slide, displaying the independent engineer's report, the one that Matthews and Associates had prepared. This is the assessment of the irrigation system on my property conducted by one of the most respected firms in Colorado. The report clearly states that the system is not only safe but exceeds current safety standards. This is the infrastructure that has protected our valley for nearly a century. I paused for a moment, letting the gravity of the statement sink in. I could see some of the council members exchanging looks, clearly processing the information. Then I clicked to the next slide, financial records, showing the HOA's embezzlement of community funds. The papers were clearly marked, and I made sure to point them out to the room. These documents show how Lily Hawthorne has used the HOA to fund her personal development projects. She's used your HOA dues to pay for landscaping work that was never done, for legal services that never existed, and for her own family's consulting firm. These are the same people who have been pushing to tear down my irrigation system. The room murmured in disbelief. I could feel the tension in the air building like a storm waiting to break. I wasn't just presenting facts anymore, I was pulling back the curtain on the entire corrupt system they had been living under. Lily's motives are clear. I continued, flipping to the next slide. She wants my land for her development project. That's all this is about. It's not about safety, it's not about protecting the community. It's about money. And in the process, she's willing to put everyone at risk. She's willing to destroy a system that has kept this community safe for over 100 years, just so she can build luxury homes for the wealthy. I could see the anger building in the crowd. People were starting to murmur, some nodding in agreement, others shaking their heads in disbelief. They had trusted Lily, but now they were seeing the truth for what it was. Lily, sitting at the front, stood up abruptly. "This is nonsense," she shouted, her voice cracking with frustration. "These reports are nothing but lies. Mr. Blackwood has manipulated everything. You can't trust him. He's trying to destroy our plans for Millbrook Estates. This system is a hazard, and I have the reports to prove it." Her words fell flat. The more she spoke, the more people seemed to turn against her. She could see it too. The shift was happening in real time, and it was undeniable. "I'm not the one lying, Lily," I said, my voice calm but firm. "You've been lying to everyone in this room, and now it's time for the truth to come out. You can't hide behind your fake reports anymore." The council members, who had been sitting passively until now, started to stir. Councilman Walsh looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat. I could see that he was beginning to realize the gravity of the situation. There was no turning back now. Lily was exposed, and the council knew it. "What Mr. Blackwood is saying is very serious," Councilman Fenton said, her voice cutting through the tension. "We can't ignore these claims. We need to investigate further." Lily's face turned red with rage. "You're all being manipulated," she spat, her voice shaking with anger. "Do you really want to listen to this?" But it was too late. The room was no longer on her side. The community had finally seen the truth. Lily's grip on power was slipping. And just as the room seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief, I knew the battle wasn't over. It was just the beginning. As the tension in the room simmered, I knew I had one last piece of the puzzle that would finally bring Lily to her knees. The council seemed to hesitate, but I could see the cracks beginning to form in Lily's defense. Now it was time to drop the bombshell, the real smoking gun. I shifted my focus from the general corruption to something far more devastating. As I clicked to the next slide, I could feel everyone's eyes on me, waiting for the next move. The next set of documents wasn't just about the dam or the irrigation system. It was about Lily's greatest mistake, the embezzlement. "Before you decide on anything, I want to show you the full scale of Lily Hawthorne's actions," I said, steadying my breath. The room went silent. I clicked through the slides to a bank statement I had acquired through a legal request. It wasn't a mere suspicion anymore, it was proof. "This is a transaction log showing a series of withdrawals and payments," I explained, pointing to the digital records projected behind me. The HOA funds were being funneled into her personal development project. Payments were made to her family-owned businesses, inflated invoices that amounted to hundreds of thousands of dollars. This is just the tip of the iceberg. I let the room absorb the weight of the revelation. The silence grew thicker as the council members leaned forward, digesting the financial evidence I had laid out. Lily didn't just use HOA money for her own gain. I continued, my voice now louder with conviction. She embezzled from the very people she was supposed to serve. She lied about the value of the land, pushed fraudulent claims about safety, and then lined her pockets while the entire community funded her schemes. I paused and scanned the room, letting the truth sink in. The room's mood had shifted entirely. Where once there had been confusion and uncertainty, now there was outrage. This wasn't just about a faulty inspection or a corrupt HOA president anymore. This was a criminal enterprise that had been running right under their noses. Lily was visibly shaking now. Her face had gone pale, and her lips trembled. The truth was out. There was no more spinning, no more pretending. The moment I finished, I knew it was over for her. The question now wasn't whether she'd lose her position, it was how much further this would go. The atmosphere in Millbrook Estates was undeniably different after Lily's exposure. The neighborhood, once divided and hesitant, now felt united in a way I had never imagined. It was like a dark cloud had been lifted, revealing the true strength of the community. The tension was gone, replaced by a palpable sense of relief. Neighbors who had once been passive, or who had reluctantly supported Lily's development plans, were now speaking up. I watched as they gathered in small groups discussing the steps forward, their voices full of hope for the first time in months. They weren't just angry anymore, they were empowered. They realized they had the power to take back control, to shape their future together without the shadow of Lily's corruption looming over them. For me, it was a bittersweet victory. The fight had drained me, but as I looked around at the faces of the people I'd fought to protect, I knew it had been worth it. It wasn't just about saving my land, it was about saving the entire community from a fate controlled by greed and lies. The legal fallout from Lily's actions came swiftly. The documents I had presented to the council had set off a chain reaction. Law enforcement took action almost immediately, and investigations were launched into Lily's embezzlement scheme. It didn't take long for the full extent of her fraud to be uncovered, and her network of corruption unraveled in the face of irrefutable evidence. The city's prosecutor filed criminal charges for embezzlement, fraud, and abuse of power. Lily's development project, which had once seemed unstoppable, was halted in its tracks. Her plan to seize my land through eminent domain was nullified, and the county moved to seize her assets. She was ordered to pay restitution for the embezzled funds and for the damage she had caused to the community. For the residents of Millbrook Estates, the legal consequences were just as important as the emotional ones. The HOA, under new leadership, underwent a complete overhaul. Lily's replacement, someone with a clear sense of transparency and responsibility, promised to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. The community was ready to move forward, free from the corruption that had once tainted their neighborhood. As the dust settled, Millbrook Estates started to rebuild, not just physically, but culturally. With Lily out of the picture, the HOA was restructured from the ground up, with the community finally taking charge. Janet Morrison, one of the most vocal critics of Lily's leadership, was voted in as the new president. Under her leadership, the HOA instituted new bylaws focused on accountability, transparency, and community involvement. The old ways were gone for good. The real symbol of our victory, however, was the irrigation system. It wasn't just a piece of land anymore. It had become a symbol of resistance, a reminder of how far we were willing to go to protect what mattered. I worked alongside county engineers to ensure that the system was not only preserved, but modernized, so it could continue to provide flood protection for future generations. It became an official landmark of Millbrook Estates, now safeguarded under county protection, and even recognized by the state as a model of sustainable water management. For me, the most meaningful moment came one chilly afternoon, a year after the battle had ended. I stood by the irrigation system watching the water flow over the rocks that had been in my family for generations. As I stood there, I realized that the fight hadn't just been about saving my property, it had been about protecting a legacy. My great-grandfather's work had stood the test of time, and now it was my job to ensure it would stand for many more years to come. My relationship with the community had transformed. I wasn't just a landowner anymore. I was a part of something bigger. We had learned that the fight for what's right is never easy, but when we come together, there's nothing we can't protect. The HOA had failed, but the community had succeeded, and in the end, that was all that mattered. Looking back, the win wasn't what mattered most. It wasn't about seeing Lily go down or watching the community rally behind me. It was about the fact that I had stood my ground, but I did so through the law. Anger only makes things worse. I could have acted impulsively, sought revenge, or escalated the conflict. But what saved my land and the community was the process following the legal path, gathering evidence, and letting the system work for me. That's the real victory. Standing up for what's right doesn't mean giving in to rage or taking shortcuts. The law, not the heat of the moment, gave me the power to defend my rights. Emotional escalation might feel good in the short term, but it rarely leads to lasting change. Evidence and due process always outshine anger. I focused on what mattered, building a case, keeping calm, and respecting the law. If you ever find yourself in a similar fight, remember this. It's not about being the loudest or the angriest. It's about being prepared. Keep good records, especially when you're dealing with bureaucracy. Make sure everything is documented from communications to agreements. Don't be afraid to consult with a lawyer when things start to feel too complicated. The right advice can make all the difference. Communities thrive when their members respect the law. Power doesn't belong to those who scream the loudest, it belongs to those who can move the system. My great-grandfather's dam wasn't just a symbol of my family's legacy. It became a reminder of how far we can go when we fight with purpose, patience, and legal integrity.